So today we're going to take the plane and get it off the ground, basically. Take it from looking like this to more like this. Yep. Go ahead and get those arms on there, get the camber set, and explain about both the camber and the toe. You want to be able to measure those. So let's get going. I painted my suspension parts before I really started assembling everything. Don't do that. It gets in the way, so wait until afterwards and you'll see as we go why. There is an alternative to painting, and that's covering everything with oil, because here in Florida, if you blink, it'll rust. Okay, so what we're going to work with today is the wheel suspension, which is I call the A-arm. There's many different names for things like this. The suspension rod, the spring that's going to hold the airplane's weight, the spring mount, which is a booger, but you'll see, and then right above that is the suspension mount that goes on the bottom of the plane. So let's get these mounted in place and see how it all goes together. Okay, so in our last video, we worked on these wheels, and I'm now mounting them onto the fuselage, and these I've got in without too much trouble. The one on this side, though, I got the back bolt in pretty well, but the front one I'm having a little alignment trouble here, so I'm going to have to work on that and get that working. You can see the bolt doesn't align with the hole very well at all. In fact, it's about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters off, and that's more than just the powder coat. This is just a slight problem that has to be, resolved with a drill to clear it out far enough and get a little bit of metal out of the way so that bolt can go through. You definitely don't want to try and pound the bolt through or screw it through. You'll mess up the threads. Don't do that. This wasn't severe enough to cause any problem. I drilled it out and the bolt then slid through, and I was able to get all 4 bolts holding the mounts, 2 on each side, of course, for the wheel suspension. Sorry about jumping around here. I wanted to go back to the rust problem that you may face just basically where you live, or if the steel gets somehow exposed to water and moisture. So this is how I deal with the rust, getting it off and being able to then primer and paint the parts. This bin right here is no longer just a storage bin. It is my vinegar bin, and you really can't see the liquid down in there. Well, there you go. Now you should be able to see it. That's vinegar, white vinegar. White vinegar is your friend. Anything that's rusted, you put it in white vinegar, and the white vinegar pretty much takes care of it. So what I've got over here is all these parts for the suspension. And there's the arm that you were looking at on the picture there. There's the parts that hold the springs, and there's the rods below the springs. And over here's the springs. Now, to get the springs off, I did have to grind down a little bit here because the springs on mine, they came already on these rods here. So I had to grind them down a little bit because I wanted the springs off so that I could paint these. And you can see they're all pretty and shiny, but a couple hours ago they weren't. A couple hours ago they were black, or pretty close to it, and you can kind of see it on my hands. Here's part of my tail wheel after sitting in the vinegar all night. There's a little bit of rust left on it, but that's going to come off with the wire wheel. And I highly suggest getting a wire wheel for your grinder. And if you don't have a grinder, get one of those too. These are steel, and they're already starting to rust. I can, just in the 15 minutes ago when I got done with the rods, I can see they're starting to rust already. You can see the coating coming on them. So I need to get some spray paint on them. So I'm going to primer them. And just a quick note on primering. Primering is easy. You do about a 50% coverage. Let it sit there for about 15 minutes. That gets the primer set up to take more primer, and it'll stop runs and all that. And then you do 2 full coats, 15 minutes apart each. Let them sit for a few hours. Come out with whatever color spray paint you want and go ahead and spray them. I'm going to spray mine black. And then I want my springs to be yellow, so I'm just going to spray them directly. Now, this stuff will wear off fairly quickly, just in use, wherever the metal touches each other, which since these shafts actually fit in here, and they'll be going up and down the top of the shaft. There'll be some scratch marks. It'll wear off. It's just the nature of the type of suspension it is, but it will work. Now, I'm not going to go through each step here of putting all these parts together. Once you get the A-arm on there, you'll want to go ahead and put on the suspension mount on the bottom of the plane, and it's pretty straightforward. Go get your nuts and bolts from your kit and put that on. I found that it was easier to put the spring mount on to the suspension mount after that, and then go ahead to the other end down at the bottom of the A-arm and put the bolt in there to get that suspension rod in place. And I almost forgot. Take the wheel and the axle off. You don't need that. You'll have to take the brake caliper off of the mount, and then the whole assembly then will just slide out of the axle tube, and you can get it out of the way. You don't need to wait for it to set the camber on this, so but it does need to be out of the way. It's just easier to work with. Now for the question about the wooden dowel. It's a 5/8" wooden dowel. It's the same size as the axle that's used to hold your wheel on. If you get a wooden dowel and cut it about 2 foot long, you can slide it in there fairly easy into the axle tube. And this is what we're going to use to set our protractor or digital angle meter on, if you have one of those, to set the camber, to find out where we need to drill our hole in the axle rod, not axle rod, but the suspension rod, to be able to put the pin in. So that's what that wooden dowel's for. So go ahead and slide that in there, and it shouldn't move much. It should be fairly tight. In fact, it might even need a little bit of sanding to get it in there, but you'll want to get that in place next. You see this slot that is in there above the spring? That bolt is supposed to be able to fit through there. Well, there's absolutely no way to get that bolt through there, and there's some spacers that have to go on that bolt, but there's no way you're going to get that bolt through there with that spring in the way. That's why I had to take my springs off. So here's what I did after I was able to get the springs off. Okay, your next step can happen before or after you put the arms and the suspension and all that on the plane, but you need to have the cockpit, or the plane itself for that matter, fairly level. So definitely left to right. That's extremely important. Front to back, not quite so important, but what I did is I put mine up on sawhorses, and then I used painter's sticks, stir sticks. You can get them at Home Depot and Lowe's and such for free. And I slowly lifted those up until both front to back and left to right was level. Okay, so once the spring is out of the way, this made moving everything a lot easier, as well as being able to see where I needed to mark the slot to drill the hole in the rod that's inside of the spring mount there. I put the protractor on. You can use a digital meter too, it doesn't matter, on the shaft that was coming out, the wooden dowel, and was able to set it at the 2.5 plus 1 angle, or I should say it's plus 2.5 plus 1, so 3.5 total to get your angle of your camber in place. And once that's done and you add weight to the plane, it's probably going to come down to the 2.5, which is ideal. You can set it anything you want. Go online and look at standard aircraft landing gear for tail draggers and see what people set them for, but the recommended is 2.5. Now go ahead and use the wooden dowel, or any other part of the suspension for that matter, and move it to the left and to the right until you get that 3.5 or 2.5 or whatever you decide degrees set on the protractor. Now in the top of the slot that is on the spring mount, you should be able to see that rod pretty clearly, and you're going to want to put a small circle in there, or just mark it so you know where the top portions are. We're going to drill a hole through this so that the mounting bolt for the spring that holds it in place can go all the way through. And now the fun part. After getting all this stuff on here, you need to take the bolt that's holding the suspension rod and the bolt that holds the spring mount up on the bottom of the plane. You need to pull those out and remove all three, the spring mount, and the suspension rod. Pull those off. Okay, so match the drill bit that you're going to use to the size of the bolt that needs to go through this hole. It's in your kit. And then put the rod up onto your drill press. Hopefully you've got something similar to how I've got the clamp there, to where once I got the drill bit itself centered on the dot that I had made on the rod, because the clamp was holding everything in place and was properly centered, I could drill through both sides at the same time. I could drill through the top and just keep turning the drill press down, and it popped through the other side, and that makes a perfectly straight hole through there. You might have to trim it a little bit, that's normal, but in general it should go straight through and be in very nice alignment. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. I've got the spring mount and the spring, and I've got a hole in my rod to where I can stick the bolt through, but the spring's still in the way. That can be an issue. The issue I ran into is my vise wasn't quite big enough to fit the spring mount and the spring in the vise itself. So with a little bit of pressure, I was actually able to get it to slide in there. Hopefully your vise is a little bit bigger. And then I just cranked it down. You can see the hole there is partly visible, and it becomes more so as you crank down on that spring and bring it down a little bit. And Viola. Hey, Captain, there'd be a hole there for a bolt. Yes, there will be. So go back to your kit, find the bolt, the washers, the spacers that are needed for this, and the nut, and slide them in place. Once you've got most of it together, it should look something similar to this. Now, why are the spacers there? Well, that's easy. If you didn't have the spacers, that spring would have a tendency to try and ride against the edge or the end of the bolt there, and probably wouldn't be too good on the other side where the nut's at. So the spacers hold that spring down so it doesn't interfere with the bolt, and that's just preservation there, and it's just a good idea. If you don't have the spacers, go get some. They're definitely needed. And with a little gentle tug, after releasing as much spring pressure as possible from the vise, the unit comes out as a whole piece, which is really nice. You can also see the chipping on the spring, and that's why you paint afterwards. So I need to disassemble this all and respray the spring and the other parts that I want painted, and then reassemble it, then go put it back on the plane. Once you've got the parts back on the plane again, you can go ahead and put your protractor back on and check the angle. At this point, you really can't change the angle. It is what it is. Mine is a little closer to 4 degrees than 3.5, but to be honest, it's minutia at this point. It's close enough and should work just fine. Now go do the other side, do the same exact process, and you should end up with some wheels on the ground. Now once you set the plane on the ground, go ahead and put the level back on it and take a look at it. Don't freak out if it's not level. You got to remember, when it was up on the sawhorses, you had manually leveled it to basically, because it's being supported, so it's going to be level. If your concrete in your shop is not level, guess what? The plane's not going to be level. It's no big deal. You probably did it right and nothing to worry about. So here's my rear wheel. I'm not doing a video on how to mount it because basically mine came pre-built. Yours may be different, and most likely is. I ordered the one with the shock, which is a little bit more advanced. Give Badland a call or jump on the forum and ask some questions. There's some guys that have the other rear wheel, which is an aluminum rod, a little bit lighter and a little easier to install probably than or put together than this one is. I got to make this one pretty, paint it up, and then get it mounted, and then we'll move on to the tail end of the bird and get our feathers on the back. Not covered with Ortex yet, but at least get them to where they're mounted properly. So look forward to that.